The journey of recovery is something that touches millions of us, but honestly, it's often surrounded by a lot of misunderstanding. So today, we're going to peel back the layers. We'll get into the science of how addiction actually works, look at the very real barriers that stop people from getting help, and then explore the many inspiring paths people take toward a hopeful future. Let's dive in.
So to get a sense of just how big this is, let's start with a number. 40 million, that is how many Americans are living with a substance use disorder right now. This isn't some far-off issue. It's right here in our communities, affecting our neighbors, our colleagues, and our families.
And this is where the story gets really interesting. A full 75% of those 40 million people, they're employed. They're active, contributing members of our communities. But, and this is a huge but, less than 10% ever actually seek help. That's an enormous gap. So, what's going on here? To figure out why there's such a massive disconnect, we first have to understand the problem itself. The real heart of the issue, it turns out, is in the brain. It is so crucial to understand that addiction is not a moral failing. It's not a lack of willpower. It's a complex brain disorder. So, let's take a look at how it literally changes our most vital organ.
Okay, so the official term you'll hear is substance use disorder, or SUD for short. And it's pretty much what it sounds like, a pattern of using a substance that causes serious, real-world problems in someone's day-to-day life. It's also a spectrum, It can be mild, moderate, or severe, with addiction being the most severe form.
To make this all a bit easier to grasp, let's use a really powerful metaphor. Think of addiction as a hijacker. It doesn't just, influence the brain. It forcefully takes over the most primitive, most powerful part of it, the survival system. It basically rewires the brain to believe that a substance is more important for survival than food, water, or even shelter.
And this right here shows us exactly where that hijacking takes place. On one side, you have the limbic system. That's our deep primal survival center. It gets tricked into thinking this substance is essential for life. At the very same time, the prefrontal cortex, which is our CEO, in charge of rational decisions and impulse control, it gets weakened. This creates this intense, primal drive for the substance with a much weaker ability to hit the brakes. That's why just stopping is, well, next to impossible.
So why do some people develop an SUD when others don't? It's definitely not random. You can think of it like a whirlpool, where certain risk factors can pull a person in deeper and faster. Things like genetics, how young someone is when they first use, their environment, and any history of trauma. The more of these risk factors someone has, the stronger that whirlpool's pull becomes.
So those risk factors create a really powerful pull, but they still don't explain the silence. Which brings us right back to that first big question. If we know this is a treatable brain disorder, why are so few people asking for help? What is this invisible wall that they're all facing?
Well, that wall is built from two different kinds of barriers. First, you have the personal ones. Things like deep-seated shame and fear, or just plain misinformation, like that totally harmful myth that you have to hit rock bottom. And then you've got the external barriers, the real-world obstacles, things like the high cost of treatment, not having transportation, or simply not having access to resources in your area.
The absolute key to tearing down that wall is education. It's that simple. When we start to understand addiction as a brain disorder, the same way we understand diabetes or heart disease, it completely reframes the entire conversation. It moves us away from blame and judgment and toward compassion and support. And that makes it so much easier for someone to finally raise their hand and ask for help.
Okay, so we've looked at the problem and the walls people face. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the solution. What is recovery, really? Because it's not just about stopping something. It's about starting a brand new journey.
This here is the official definition from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, and I think it's such an empowering way to put it. Recovery is a process of change. It's about improving your health, living a life that you direct, and trying to reach your full potential. It's an active, hopeful, forward-moving thing. And this is absolutely critical to remember. Recovery is not a straight line. It's a journey. And just like any long journey, there can be setbacks. That is a normal part of the process, not a failure. The real goal here isn't perfection, it's resilience.
So what helps build that resilience? Well, it comes down to something called recovery capital. The best way to think about it is like a toolkit. It's the sum of all the resources, both inside and out, that a person can draw on to start and, just as importantly, sustain their recovery.
This recovery capital is basically made up of three key things. You've got personal capital, that's someone's skills, their physical and mental health, having a safe place to live. Then there's social capital. That's all about supportive relationships with family, friends, and coworkers. And finally, community capital, which is about having access to things like local recovery programs. The more capital someone has in each of these areas, the stronger their foundation for recovery is.
And all of this brings us to one of the most important points I can make. There is no single right way to recover. Period. Just like every person is unique, so is their path forward.
We can generally group these pathways into three main categories: self-managed, non-clinical, and clinical. And what you'll find is that very often a person's journey will involve a mix of all of these different approaches over time. So let's just quickly break these down. Self-managed is pretty much what it sounds like: recovery without any formal support systems. Non-clinical pathways are all about peer support, like 12-step programs or other mutual aid groups. And then clinical paths involve professionals. We're talking therapy, detox, or medication. All of these are completely valid. What really matters is finding the mix that works for the individual. And now we get to the final and, I think, most important part of this whole explainer: your role in all of this. Because everyone, and I mean everyone, can play a part in supporting recovery. So let's talk about how you can be a true ally.
You know, it often starts with something as simple as the words we choose. Our language has so much power. It can either build up those walls of stigma, or it can create bridges of support. Using labels like addict or junkie, that just shuts conversations down. But using person-first language like a person with a substance use disorder, that opens them right up.
So here are 3 simple, totally actionable steps anyone can take. First, share what you've learned here today to help knock down that stigma. Second, look for ways to help build recovery capital in your own community. Maybe that's supporting recovery-friendly workplaces. And third, just make a conscious choice to use supportive and compassionate language.
And this right here is really the main takeaway. You don't need to be an expert to make a huge difference. You don't need all the answers. You just need to be willing to start. A little bit of knowledge and a whole lot of compassion, that can go a very, very long way. So, I'll leave you with this question to think about. Armed with everything you've just learned, what's one single conversation you can start today to help change the story around addiction and recovery where you live? Thanks so much for joining us.